What if the most powerful voice in early Christianity never actually met Jesus? What if the entire foundation of Christian theology, grace, justification by faith, salvation for the Gentiles, came from a man who once hunted down Christians and then claimed to have heard a voice in the desert? Some say Paul was a liar, others call him a visionary, but to many in the Jewish world, he was a rebel, a heretic who hijacked Judaism and reshaped it into something entirely new. Did Paul hijack the faith of his ancestors to create something new, or did something truly supernatural happen on that road to Damascus? In this video, we're diving deep, not just into the biblical story, but into the criticisms, the psychology, and the history. And we'll confront the most explosive question of all. Was Paul's transformation real, or was it the greatest religious rebranding in history? Stick around, because by the end, you won't just be rethinking Paul, you might be rethinking everything. And if you want to learn undiluted biblical and Christian truths, I invite you to subscribe to Christian Chronicles. Now let's begin. Before he was Paul the Apostle, he was Saul of Tarsus, a man of pedigree, privilege, and power. Born in the city of Tarsus, a major cultural hub in the Roman Empire, Saul held Roman citizenship, an extraordinary status for a Jew. But his identity ran deeper than geography or politics. He was a Pharisee, a member of one of the strictest and most respected Jewish sects of the time. And not just any Pharisee. He was trained under Gamaliel, one of the most revered rabbis in Jewish history. Saul didn't just know the law, he lived it, breathed it, defended it. He was young, brilliant, and zealous, utterly committed to preserving the purity of Judaism. And when a new sect emerged, proclaiming that a crucified Galilean carpenter was the Messiah, Saul saw it not as a revelation, but a blasphemy. He hunted them, tracked them, dragged them from their homes and synagogues. He stood by approvingly as the first Christian martyr, Stephen, was stoned to death. For Saul, this wasn't cruelty, it was justice, it was faithfulness. But something was about to rupture his mission and his mind. The story of Paul's transformation is told 3 times in the book of Acts, each with striking consistency and subtle variation. In Acts 9, we get the original narrative. Saul is on the road to Damascus, carrying letters from the high priest, intending to arrest followers of Jesus. Suddenly, a light from heaven flashes around him. He falls to the ground and hears a voice, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" He asks, "Who are you, Lord?" The reply comes, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting." Blinded by the light, Saul is led by hand into the city. For 3 days, he neither eats nor drinks. Then comes Ananias, a follower of Jesus, who, instructed by a vision, lays hands on Saul. Something like scales falls from his eyes. He regains his sight, is baptized, and immediately begins proclaiming Jesus as the Son of God. In Acts 22, Paul himself recounts the event before a hostile Jewish crowd in Jerusalem. He adds personal detail, his deep Jewish roots, his training under Gamaliel, his zeal for persecuting Christians. When describing the Damascus encounter, he notes the brilliance of the light and the awe that overcame his companions, though they didn't understand the voice. Here, Ananias is described not just as a disciple, but as a devout Jew respected by all. Then, in Acts 26, speaking before King Agrippa, Paul expands further. He says the light shone brighter than the sun, and again quotes the voice of Jesus. This time, Jesus gives Paul a mission. "I am sending you to them to open their eyes, so that they may turn from darkness to light." It's not just a moment of personal transformation, it's a divine commission. Across all 3 accounts, the core details remain the same. The blinding light, the voice from heaven, the fall to the ground, the loss and restoration of sight, and the radical redirection of Saul's life. But did it really happen, or was it a masterstroke of manipulation? Not everyone accepts Paul's Damascus experience at face value. Over the centuries, scholars, skeptics, and theologians have raised serious questions about what really happened. These objections usually fall into three main categories. First, contradictions in the accounts. Critics point out that the three versions of Paul's conversion in Acts, chapters 9, 22, and 26, differ in detail. In Acts 9, the men with Paul are said to hear the voice but see no one. In Acts 22, Paul says they saw the light but didn't hear the voice. Some view these differences as contradictions that undermine the reliability of the story. New Testament scholar Bart Ehrman often highlights these variations as evidence that the account is not a consistent, objective record of events, but a narrative shaped to fit theological goals. Second, psychological explanations. Some propose that Paul experienced a psychological or neurological episode, possibly an epileptic seizure or a hallucination brought on by stress, guilt, or religious obsession. Paul, after all, was deeply immersed in Jewish law and violently opposed to the followers of Jesus. Perhaps the cognitive dissonance of persecuting those who spoke of mercy and resurrection triggered a breakdown. Albert Schweitzer and others in the early 20th century advanced the theory that Paul's vision was a form of internal crisis projected as a divine encounter. Third, accusations of invention. A more cynical critique suggests that Paul fabricated or exaggerated the Damascus event for strategic reasons. According to this view, he needed a dramatic story to legitimize his authority, especially because he never knew Jesus personally. By claiming a heavenly commission, Paul could bypass the original apostles and introduce his own theological agenda. Some Jewish scholars have argued that Paul's teachings significantly diverged from both Judaism and the message of Jesus, creating what they see as an entirely new religion. Each of these criticisms strikes at the heart of Paul's credibility. And if his story collapses under scrutiny, so too might much of the New Testament that follows. But do these criticisms hold up under closer scrutiny? Let's start with the claim of contradictions. It's true that Paul's conversion is told 3 times in Acts, and each version has slight variations. But in the context of ancient storytelling, especially within the Greco-Roman and Jewish world, this isn't unusual, it's expected. Orators tailored their message to suit their audience. Paul spoke to Jews, Gentiles, and Roman officials, each with different assumptions and backgrounds. Adjusting emphasis or detail wasn't deception, it was effective communication. More importantly, the core elements remain the same across all 3 accounts. The journey to Damascus, the blinding light, the voice identifying as Jesus, the temporary blindness, and the transformative encounter with Ananias. What we see are not contradictions, but complementary angles, each version adding texture to the same event. And we must remember, Paul didn't write these accounts himself. They were recorded by Luke, a physician and historian and a companion of Paul. Luke's role was not just theological, but documentary. As with any careful historian, he preserved multiple versions because each had value for different audiences. Also worth noting, Paul wasn't a rogue prophet setting out on his own mission. From the beginning, he submitted his gospel to the other apostles. In Galatians and Acts 15, we see Paul seeking the approval and affirmation of the Jerusalem church. He didn't declare independence, he sought alignment. His message was tested, discussed, and ultimately affirmed by those who had walked with Jesus in the flesh. So when we talk about the historical coherence of Paul's story, it isn't built on blind faith. It's built on consistent narrative structure, cultural context, and a pattern of accountability that runs from Damascus to Jerusalem. Even if we accept that the narrative holds up historically, what about the psychological explanations? Could Paul's experience have simply been a hallucination, a moment of mental collapse under religious pressure? It's a theory some scholars propose, but it doesn't stand up to the weight of what followed. Ask yourself, why would a guilt-induced hallucination drive someone to abandon everything? His status as a respected Pharisee, his Roman privileges, his future as a rising religious leader, for a life of beatings, imprisonment, and eventually execution. This wasn't a man easing his conscience through therapy. This was a man walking into fire. The change in Paul was immediate, total, and costly. One day, he was arresting Christians. Days later, he was preaching Christ in synagogues, confounding his peers and alarming his allies. Conversion psychology tells us something important. Hallucinations may trigger momentary religious experiences, but they almost never lead to sustained, radical life changes that involve years of suffering and self-sacrifice. People who hallucinate typically need support. Paul, instead, became the support for others, organizing churches, writing letters, enduring hardship, and refusing to recant. Whatever happened to him on that road, it wasn't a brief episode of inner turmoil. It was a complete reorientation of life and purpose, one so strong it never unraveled. That's not the fruit of psychological fragility, that's the mark of conviction. If Paul wasn't delusional, then maybe, some argue, he was just clever. A brilliant strategist who invented a new religion out of an old one, using the name of Jesus as a foundation for something radically different. But that theory too collapses under close inspection. Paul didn't invent Christianity, he aligned himself with it. In Galatians chapters 1 and 2, Paul is clear. After his encounter on the Damascus road, he didn't go off and start his own movement. Instead, he went to Jerusalem to meet Peter and James. He laid out his message before them, not for approval, but to ensure he wasn't running in vain. And what happened? They gave him their blessing. The gospel he preached, the death and resurrection of Jesus as the fulfillment of Jewish prophecy, was in complete harmony with theirs. What Paul did was not invent new doctrine, but interpret the implications of Jesus' resurrection for the wider world. His mission was different in scope, not in substance. While Peter focused on Jews, Paul turned toward Gentiles, because he believed the Jewish Messiah was meant for all nations. But the core remained the same. Jesus, crucified and risen, was Lord. And ask yourself this, what did Paul gain by switching sides? He gave up everything, his influence among the Pharisees, his social standing, his safety. In return, he got lashes, stonings, hunger, shipwrecks, prison, and ultimately execution. Not for a theory, not for a movement he concocted, but for a man he believed was alive. Paul's writings are saturated with scripture, from Isaiah to the Psalms to Deuteronomy. His theology is Jewish in structure and messianic in substance. He didn't create a break from Judaism. He believed he was witnessing its fulfillment. So what really happened on the road to Damascus? A blinding light, a voice from heaven, a man shattered and remade in an instant. History remembers it as a conversion, skeptics call it something else, and believers see it as a divine appointment. But one thing is certain, whatever Paul encountered that day changed the course of the world. His letters laid the groundwork for Christian theology. His life challenged both empire and tradition. His voice still echoes through time, unsettling the proud and comforting the broken. But maybe this story isn't just about Paul. Maybe it's about all of us. From rabbi to rebel, or from rebel to redeemed. Maybe that road to Damascus wasn't the end of a story, but the start of yours. If you liked this video, please like it and share it. Do not forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.